all, I just love skiing, like so much. There's nothing in the world that brings me more joy ever.
Scared to death right now, but I've got this. Like, I know deep down inside I'm capable of what I'm about to do.
I felt like the rehab was pretty simple and straightforward, and I learned how to appreciate my body and how to take care of it, what to eat, and like to stretch. I was 18, so I felt like I was invincible at the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Athletic Stance Podcast, a skier's perspective with your host, yours truly, Scott Chrisman. In this podcast, I have made it my job to go out and interview skiers at the highest level of the sport, to explore their perspective on life, what shaped and influenced them to become the person they are, and a whole lot more. First, let's take a look at our sponsors, because without them, none of this is possible. Our first sponsor is Northwest Tech. If you haven't heard of them yet, you're missing out. They hand make customizable 3-layer outerwear to order in the Pacific Northwest. And that means you know that it keeps you warm, dry, and looking unique while you're sending it around the mountain. They've been generous enough to give me a coupon code for my listeners. Use the code AOS75 to get $75 off any custom piece of outerwear. Their site is in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by POC. POC makes the best helmets, goggles, and protective wear out there. They've been dedicated to protecting athletes since day one, and I wouldn't wear a different helmet, goggle, back pad, or hip pads. With their spin technology and VPD system, there are no other products on the market that are like it. Definitely go and check out POCsports.com and protect yourself today.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Athletic Stance, episode number 21. This episode, I brought back an athlete that I talked to a couple weeks ago. We talked a lot about mindfulness and transcending duality and just kind of becoming a part of the process. And in this episode, we talked about nutrition, a plant-based diet, and how TJ David uses it to be the best athlete he can possibly be. Without further ado, let's check out this week's Athletic Stance, a skier's perspective with Scott Chrisman.
Go to training races leading up to, I've got a 50-mile race in 3 weeks now. Yeah, about 2.5, 3 weeks that I'm just preparing for.
Yeah. How long was this last one?
The last one, the one on Saturday, was 50K trail race. And then the previous one was marathon. So kind of a progression up to 50 miles.
Yeah, totally. Break the body in.
Exactly.
Make sure it's ready.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sweet. How much time do you have today? Just so I know.
What do I have for time? Infinite time. Like an hour, something? Hour and a half.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, yeah, I mean, basically, since we talked about mindset so much last time, I would just wanted to talk about, like, the physical aspect of it this time a little bit more and, like, nutrition, routine, and like what you do for training, the plant-based diet, all that.
Sure. Yeah, to get into all those things.
Super good response from the last episode, by the way. Everyone loved it, so thanks again for that.
Absolutely.
But cool. Yeah, let's just jump right in. Welcome back, TJ David. So good to have you back. Last time we talked a ton about mindset, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about the physical aspect. And we were just talking about you getting ready for a 50-mile trail race and what that takes and how you're leveling up and, basically making sure that your body's ready. One thing that we really didn't get to talk about at all last time was that you have a specific diet. So I'd love it if you could talk about your diet and then what race prep looks like for a 50-mile race and kind of what the physical training looks like and what your calendar and your schedule looks like. Obviously, I have to maintain a work schedule as well. So, yeah.
I guess the diet thing, we can start right with that. So I have been eating a vegan diet for 3 years, I'd like to say. And I was vegetarian for a year or two-ish in the progression towards veganism. But I consider that more of a plant-based diet than I would put the label veganism on it, because I still I utilize things that use animal products in my daily life. For example, the skins that I use to ski, to climb and ski, those are made with animal hair. So technically, that wouldn't be very vegan. So when I think about my diet, I think about plant-based. I don't really put the vegan thing on it, although a lot of people would probably label my diet to be vegan. But more specifically for me, when it comes to training, when it comes to trying to do multiple ski days in a row, back-to-back, bigger efforts, back-to-back, really what it comes down to is the diet is anti-inflammatory. So it has, in its essence, very low acidity, which creates inflammation. It makes it harder for your muscles, for your body to recover. Granted, I don't think one, and I talk about this with friends all the time, I don't think one diet necessarily works for everybody. I think each person kind of is adapted based on their genetics to, and are maybe predisposed to eat a different way. But for me, I stumbled on to the plant-based thing. And after a bit of trial and error, I found that it worked really, really well for me. Way more energy, just my ability to have a bigger day and then back it up with another bigger day when I'm really focused on what I'm eating, when I'm really considering what I'm putting into my body. It makes a major difference for me, my energy level. In terms of productivity, I'm just able to do more. And I think that helped me quite a bit last year when I first started jumping into ultra running and competitive racing, really, because I've always been a trail runner. I guess just to segue from, we can talk about specific foods if you want to, but just to segue between this broader diet thing with what I do in the summer to train and to kind of keep active and fit for winter. I've always been really into the trail running thing because summer schedule, with work, you have maybe a limited time to get out and to utilize. In Aspen, we have so much terrain. We have such a great network of trails. So it's nice to be able to get out there, and you can see a lot more if you can. Quite honestly, if you can run, you can see way more in a shorter amount of time than you can if you're out hiking. And so that was a huge motivator for me. And over time, when I started to build my base up, my ability to run farther, was never very fast at that time. But that's something that comes with more experience always. The nutrition really helped me. Last year, I was getting into a bunch of races. I did maybe 5 races with all ultras, so like over marathon distance, trail races. And I just noticed that in preparation, especially for those kind of events, for like a 50-mile event, when you're preparing for that, there are several days during the week where you do large back-to-back days. For example, like on a Saturday, I might run 22 miles with like 4,000 feet of climbing. And then Sunday, I would do like 12 to 15 miles with maybe 2,500 or 3,000 feet of climbing. So like I noticed that like I felt significantly better when I narrowed down exactly what foods I was eating leading up to like a big training effort, and then like while actually doing the effort, and then recovering from the effort. So normally, like if on a Saturday I did 22 miles, and then on a Sunday I did like 12 or 15 miles, Monday I'd have a day off, and then Tuesday I would go back into training, but something, lesser mileage, maybe like 6 to 8 miles with an easy pace, and then continuing back up to another big weekend of, maybe a 3-hour run on Saturday and Sunday. And for me, like the diet thing makes the most sense, because if you have less inflammation when you're pushing your body to maybe like its limit a little bit in terms of what you're capable of, you can actually go farther. You're able to access more because your body isn't dealing with inflammation. It's not whatever the processes that it uses to cut down on inflammation, specifically a lot of inflammation that comes from eating animal proteins, very well backed up by science at this point, is that if you eat animal proteins, it creates a lot of inflammation, and it actually is very difficult for your body to process and digest those foods. So your body is utilizing a lot of energy towards those systems instead of helping your muscles recover for your next effort. So in theory, which is no longer theory for me because for me it works, is that I eat a diet that's very low in acidity when it's anti-inflammatory, I'm able to recover faster because I'm not wasting any energy on digesting foods that I know that I can't really digest that well to begin with.
Yeah. How did you first get introduced to a vegetarian diet and then a vegan diet? Like how did you first discover it? What was like the process of that? How it's not like, one day, because I don't know. Yeah. How did that process happen?
That's a very, that's an interesting question for me. So I got really sick from eating. I wouldn't say I've always had a very healthy diet, and at times, even as a vegan, I can still, or plant-based or whatever, I can still be unhealthy and eat some processed foods and stuff that I feel like for me it just tastes good and like it's not. Well, anyways, I got really sick from eating like this charcuterie that we had. And I had like a really terrible infection in my intestines. And I was in the hospital. I probably lost like 15 pounds in the first like 24 hours I was sick.
Wow.
It was awful. It was one of the worst experiences physically that I've ever had. And I had been talking with some friends who were like kind of, they were telling me like, hey, you should really like consider, this was before, like you should consider you're an athlete, you should consider eating less red meat. It's really hard to digest. And I didn't really know anything about it. And I kind of was one of those people who, after a big effort, like I would love to eat a burger, or something just like that. Like that's what I feel like my body needs after a major effort. Which, later I found out wasn't the case, but at one time or another, you have certain routines and things that you feel work for you. and it's hard to get out of that. So like when I got really sick, it was, and I knew exactly what it was from. It was from eating that charcuterie, cured meat, and I just never wanted to experience that again. It took me weeks to recover physically from that. It was during the winter. Like I didn't feel I could ski to my potential at all because I got so weak from being sick, going to the hospital, and all that. And so from that point on, I became vegetarian, and I had maybe done a month or two, 6 months prior to that, just dabbling in a diet without red meat. And I said, you know what, like, I'm just going to go all in, like no more meat at all. No more fish, no more beef, whatever. And it kind of started a long process to becoming fully plant-based, because, you know, you develop a lot of addiction to food in my mind. There are so many things, there's so many things that you associate with certain moments. Like I mentioned, like after a big day of skiing, like maybe you want nothing more than to eat a huge burger, or like 2 slices of pizza or something. Like there are these associations that I had. And it took a lot of time to break out of that. Like I wasn't willing as a vegetarian to give up dairy at all. Although I never drank milk my whole life, and I think milk is quite honestly one of the worst things you can possibly drink. That
Totally agree.
Creates osteoporosis, and it's not good for you. It's, you know, that's also very well backed up and proven by science. There's so many alternatives to dairy milk now, that it just baffles me that anybody drinks milk, period. But you know, I didn't like milk, but I love cheese. And, you know, it's basically the same thing, just in a different form. It has all of the same animal proteins and animal fats that both beef, chicken, eggs, fish, all of that have those same components. And those same components really just poison my body. Some people, maybe they're able to process those things better based on their genetic makeup. But for me, no. And it took me a long time to like break out of that. And I was very much, you know, I just didn't want to believe that you couldn't eat dairy. Like I didn't want to believe that like cheese for me, and like I'll tell you this, like being vegetarian was fine. Like that worked pretty well because dairy supplemented maybe like a bunch of calories that I wanted, and like it triggered those those like receptors in my brain that I associated with like food in different moments, and as well as those things that like make you feel good when you eat certain foods, much like probably taking certain drugs does the same exact thing. Those receptors in your brain go off, and like there's addiction there if you can't learn to get out of that. And it takes time. So like when I started getting confronted with information that suggested that being vegetarian didn't mean you were healthy necessarily, or eating healthier, I finally, and it was through a relationship that I was having with the girl, and she was nutritionist and she was vegan, and she helped me to transition to becoming plant-based. And when I say vegan for her, like she was fully vegan. She would never have like utilized ever any product made from anything coming from animals. But for me, like that wasn't necessarily a priority. It was trying to figure out like how to make my diet work better for me as an athlete. That was my first major driving motivation to get where I am. And giving up the dairy was hard. I did it in steps for sure. And I always felt I was lacking something, or not really feeling satiated by the food I was eating. And that was really difficult. I think it's a tough transition depending on where you come from. But for me, the biggest thing was once I did give up dairy, once I finally, after a few months of not eating dairy, and I mainly cheese, that's when I noticed the biggest difference in my energy levels. That's when I felt my body started to lose a lot of the inflammation that was holding me back, making me tired after, say, going and skiing for 8 hours, a big day, and then coming home and just being exhausted and someone calling me up, hey, let's go ski tomorrow. Let's go climb this peak or whatever. No, I don't want to. I need a day off. And then eventually that became like, sure, absolutely. I could definitely go tomorrow, or I could go trail running or go climbing because I don't feel nearly as sore from a big effort anymore. And for me, it was the dairy that I think was the biggest contributor.
Yeah, that's crazy for you that it was dairy, because I have experimented with a ketogenic diet before, which is like almost the exact opposite. You know, you use a lot of I use a lot of coconut oil, have used a lot of coconut oil, but a lot of butter, avocado oil, coconut oil, but very fat heavy diet. And the theory behind it is the same as limiting oxidative stress, which is the source of inflammation, but just going about it, completely differently. And so it's something that I've wanted to experiment with to see how I do with vegan diet versus the ketogenic diet that I've eaten before. Because the keto diet, when I am in ketosis, I can totally day after day after day after day after day after day, whatever it is, however hard I want to go, I can go. And it's pretty awesome. There is a limit once, I think you have to be able to play this fine balance of adding the glycogen back into your muscles, because your muscles need glycogen, which is resourced from glucose. And that's
that's very important for recovery.
Exactly. Yep.
If I could just say, I think what you may be driving at is what is known as fat additive.
Yep, totally.
So when you can utilize fat as a energy source, you can potentially eat more fats. So, that's kind of the big thing with trail running and any endurance sports really is being able to utilize fat as an energy resource. So we have sounds like you probably have studied this a little bit, Scott, but it's carbohydrates or sugars are going to be your first resource for energy. And then you have fats, and then you have proteins, which are almost never going to be utilized. And so, for example, in a race, if you're running, say you're running a 50K, you're going to access carbohydrates for your energy source right away. But if you go out too hard, too fast, you'll never reach the fat adaptive stage where you can start to utilize fats as your energy source. And if you don't utilize those, you have to constantly put in, products like gels or something, where they simplify carbohydrates with a bunch of different amino acids and things for your energy. And you have to take them every 20, 40 minutes throughout an entire effort in order to continue to use carbohydrates. But if you go slow enough and you eat enough fats and you exercise in a certain way, you can transition from using carbohydrates to using fats right away. And we talked a little bit about in the last episode, we talked a little bit about mountain endurance and this lifelong pursuit of having this endurance in the mountains. I mentioned Chris Davenport totally has that. When we went out together, I could see this guy's fit. It's not necessarily training every day to be fit for climbing and skiing or cycling, whatever he does. But he has this thing. And a lot of that for him, I think I observed that he utilizes fats really quickly. So your longevity during the day is going to be better. Now, I think a lot of energy comes directly from carbohydrates. So technically, I eat a very carbohydrate rich diet because that is the first and foremost thing that you're going to utilize for energy throughout the day. for day-to-day stuff, like for me, I'm eating like bananas, apples. I'm eating fruits, a lot of fruits, and I like grains, stuff like that are rich in carbohydrates, also a little bit of protein. I don't really concern with protein very much. People always ask me, you're plant-based, you eat vegan, you don't get enough protein. Like, protein isn't a source of energy. You can't use protein for energy unless you're basically starving. I mean, it's very difficult. You're going to use carbohydrates and you're going to use fats. So
yeah, it doesn't make sense to break something that's built out of amino acids, which are like a bunch of strands, to break that down into individual amino acids just to remake it into more amino acids, when you could take carbohydrates and build amino acids, which is the repair process. You do need some, reagents from proteins and everything. But yeah, it's totally like, it's funny that people are so adamant about getting protein in a vegan diet when you're like, definitely. If you have a nice healthy balance. And the thing about like a male hormonal system is it does really well with fructose. Like testosterone does really, really well with the presence of fructose.
Yeah.
So having fruit, being able to incorporate fruit into your diet, and being fat adapted, like that's a really, really fine balance, because the keto, like your body has to be really used to flipping into a fat adapted state, because
absolutely.
If not, then you do end up going into a point where you start to break down your own proteins, your own muscle to get energy. And it's like, but then, so there's so much about being able to use your own fat or use fat as a source of energy. And the cool thing, I don't know how much you know about it, but basically like carbohydrate has 4 calories per gram, soda is protein, and then fat has 9. But when fat gets processed through your liver into a ketone body is actually kind of like a 4th macro, which is what the fuel source is, and it has 5.6 calories per gram. And it, instead of your mitochondria being powered by glucose, which is the very, very, very basic carbohydrate, I'm forgetting the label, but that when your blood lacks the presence of that and your body is used to being fat adapted, then your liver will start to process fat into ketones. And then those ketones are actually a more efficient energy for your mitochondria. So it causes less oxidative stress, and oxidative stress is the cause of inflammation. So that's where like the whole fat adaptive science.
I think it's really interesting, and we can go back a little bit to my training if you want, just for a moment, and kind of talk about that for a second. With like, you understand, like with a big day in the mountains, if you're going to go skiing for 7-8 hours, you're going to go climb and ski a peak, you tend to like slip without really knowing into those zones where you're not going so fast. Your heart rate is in the correct place, that you are utilizing fats. And I think the most interesting thing that I've learned now that I work with a coach for endurance training and for ultra running, one of the things that we've kind of talked about and I've discovered through working with him is that like all of these long days that I've done ski related have actually allowed me to be more like fat adaptive than I realized, because I'm in such a low heart rate zone. And it's this pace that like you would just consider conversational or like an easy pace. But for the most part, that's where you want to be training anyways. So because you're developing all of these other little things that help you to gain endurance and in the long run speed. Like when you're not training in these zones that are, just under like lactate threshold, you're going to be developing your blood capillaries. You're going to be getting these systems together that allow for the transport and like of blood through your system, especially through your legs, which keep lactic acid from building up. It allows it to be flushed at a different rate. And if you can keep the lactic acid flushing through your system, you're able to be out there for longer, and you have to be working in an efficient way to do that. So you train in different zones. And skiing, like ski mountaineering, for the most part, you're in like zone 1 and 2. Your heart rate's never up. You're always, like, to simplify it, you're conversational, like I mentioned. And then training for running is the same thing, but you can also mix in longer days where you don't take in like carbohydrate while you're running. So for example, like you have your normal breakfast. You might bring whatever sports energy drink. I use Sword Performance, which is a carbohydrate drink. And I might just bring one bottle for 2 hours, like one 20-ounce bottle. It's 140 calories. It's barely anything. And if I'm going at an easy pace, I'm going to enter the fat adaptive stage where I'm going to utilize fats. And then my body is going to start to get more and more used to that. So I do a run like that almost every week. So that way, when I get to race day, if I don't start out too fast, I can more quickly, usually in the first hour or so, enter that zone where I'm not necessarily utilizing carbohydrates. I'm utilizing fats, and that allows for me to run faster for longer because I have a more sustainable food source out there. And I don't eat fats during the race because you do still need carbohydrates. Like, it's still very much driven by carbohydrates. But if your like engine in itself is running on those fats, and like it does take the training. Like, if you're not out there doing these efforts and like kind of, I don't want to say you're like starving yourself out there, but you're not giving yourself like carbohydrate fuel. It allows your body it forces your body to use, fats as a way to fuel itself. And, I've had like a lot of good success with this, probably because I use the skiing. The skiing has really helped with that. But at the same time, there are moments where I think with my diet, and this is something that having a coach really helped me with, was that if you're eating primarily like fruits and vegetables, grains, the plant-based diet is not a caloric-rich diet. If you're eating like animal fats, like you're going to be getting a lot more bang for your buck calories. So I think at first when I was getting into this stuff, and like many friends will attest, like I've had some like pretty bad days in the mountains. A couple, like for sure, totally, like they make me laugh because I was just bonking so hard, like not keeping up at all, and just cursing myself in the diet. And it took a while to figure that out. And for anyone who's listening to this podcast or maybe eats plant-based a little bit, the diet does require a bit more focus. And for me, working with my coach, in considering my training schedule, especially in the summer for races, I eat way more fats than I do in the winter, and I eat just way more fats. For one, it gives me more calories. Two, it allows me to maintain my weight when I'm training every single day, 6 days a week, and some efforts are like up to 3,000 calories or more of burn in a single effort. That's very difficult to put 3,000 calories back into your body just to break even on a plant-based diet. That's not easy to do. It can be a struggle. And the worst thing in the world is when you run like a big effort on Saturday, like I talked to you, like training for a 50K or a 50 mile, you do like 22 miles. And then and not having put enough fuel back in, like the Sunday long run following is going to feel horrible if you don't really dial in your nutrition. So I really stepped up like this summer and kind of this spring too. When I was in France, I really stepped up my fat intake. And that has allowed me to have a lot more energy. And surprisingly, because I was very much of the mindset like that, my body is very carbohydrate driven. You know, if I'm hungry, if I feel something, I'm going to eat an apple. I'm going to eat a banana. I'll have a bowl of granola with almond milk. But now I definitely turn more to like a lot more avocados. I eat at least a whole avocado a day, and that's a lot of fats. I eat quite a lot of peanut butter.
I was going to say the nut butters are so good. If you've ever tried peanut butter with coconut oil in it, because peanut butter can be kind of dry, and the peanut butter coconut oil makes it like a lot creamier. Because I was trying to trend more towards the plant-based oils when I was on the ketogenic diet, because eating bacon all the time, it's just not good on your digestive system. You can feel it, and so you start exploring, you're like, okay, how do I make this more plant-based? And one of the things that the only animal product that I realized that was like decent for me, my digestive system, was like ghee, which like had all the milk fats taken out of it, and milk proteins milk proteins taken out of it. And that, like, depending on the kind, was decent. But it's cool to hear that you're focusing more on fats, because fats are also what tell our body that we're satiated. Like carbohydrates
100%. I completely agree.
won't tell you that you're satiated. That's why you can sit and just snack and snack and snack. But if you eat an avocado, you get that fat in you, your body will be like, oh yeah, like I have sustenance, cool, let's go.
Totally. I'm an endless pit for carbohydrates, especially when they enter like on the more simple side, like white flours, and anything like that. If it's pasta, if it's bagels, I can eat those things all day and not necessarily feel full. Rather, if I combine that with avocado, or if I make that a smaller portion and lead more towards fats at certain times, like I will feel much more satiated. And I think that kind of, for me, especially my food addictions, like getting out of a more animal protein based diet and transitioning to plant-based, my food addiction were, like I mentioned before, were very much rooted in dairy, on everything. I love Mexican food. I love Italian food. It just, everything has cheese or butter or both, or something that utilizes those elements, those ingredients. And it was very hard for me to not feel satiated without having had those things in my food. And so for me, it really took, to dial in being plant-based, for me was a lot of trial and error. And depending on the time of year, depending on my training, because I focus a lot more on the ultra running stuff, especially in the summer, and in the last like year and a half, it's been something I've been training like almost all year round with. More fats has definitely helped me. There's a lot of literature. There's a lot of stuff you can read or listen to. There's a lot of great doctors out there who are going to talk to you about like 80-10-10 and diets that are very much carbohydrate based and like whole food diets. So it's not going to be eating, for example, bagels and processed pastas. It's going to be eating more of quinoa and grains and whole wheat, stuff like that. Probably leaning towards staying away from products with gluten because those can also be inflammatory. And then only 10% of your diet should be protein and fat, a lot of people are saying. And I think for some people, this can really work, because if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, especially if they come from whole foods, you're going to be getting a very sustainable energy source for the day. I think you're not going to feel, and if you're eating enough, you won't feel those crashes that kind of can happen on other diets.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just one more thing, Scott. I think at the same time, if you are training really hard, you can't be necessarily of this mindset that only one way works. Like, you need to use your experience and try different things in order to understand exactly what works for you, because my plant-based version might not work for like Sage Kennedy, another ultra runner, pretty prolific guy that I follow, who is also plant-based. Like, my plant-based isn't going to be probably the same as his, or the same as, and all these other guys, like Scott Jurek is another ultra runner who has been plant-based, and he eats like more towards the raw side of stuff, with very little processed food, very little cooked foods. So it depends. It really depends on you. You know, that's the most interesting thing about nutrition. I talk to a lot of people about it. And if I think, for me, if I could give somebody advice who's looking just to be healthier, eat one meal a day that's like 60 or 70% raw food, just so you can get all the micro and macronutrients that you need that come as close to the source as possible, that aren't corrupted by being processed or cooked, because you do lose a lot of nutrients. And I think in the end, the issues for a lot of people with diet and energy and feeling good and being able to like train to their potential, or to perform in whatever they're doing to their potential, is their just lack of overall nutrition. Doesn't have to be that you're plant-based, doesn't have to be that you follow like a very strict diet. It just, you might not be meeting the basic needs for your micro and like macro nutrients. You might not just be getting at all the vitamins and nutrients that help your system run. And if you eat like a big green salad with a bunch of vegetables, one meal a day, I think your overall health would improve quite a lot. I think that would probably be universal for most people.
Yeah, totally. Flipping back to what you said about before we get back to this, about the like processed foods, and how, you know, if you're eating this 80-10-10 diet, but you're eating whole foods, that you're not going to have those crashes. You know, like the science of it is, if you go out and you break down the wheat and turn it into flour, you're removing one process that your body would have to do. And then if you go out and you take the sugar cane and you break it down into white sugar, and then you mix the white sugar and the white flour together, and, you know, and then you create these, you like remove the body's process, and you create these like easier sources of energy. So then your body breaks down that blood sugar, gets access to that blood sugar super quickly. And like, yeah, maybe if you're, you know, like in exercise, or you need like carbohydrates immediately, like maybe that's good. It still probably isn't, you know. But yeah, like when you remove the like those crazy roller coaster spikes because of the processing, then, you know, having a fruit smoothie or having fruit, all those things, or quinoa, when it's attached to fiber, your body processes it slower, and then you have an even blood sugar line, you know. And a lot of people think, they get scared of sugar, especially like diabetics, because of their blood sugar spikes. And it's like, when your body has a blood sugar sensitivity, and so when you the more carbohydrates that you eat that are attached to fiber, and the more your body gets used to regulating that blood sugar and is better at insulating it or regulating its insulin, then you're going to be better off. And then like the same goes with fat, is like everyone's afraid of eating fat because they think it's going to make you fat. But the more fat you eat, the better your body is at processing fat. So the more fat you're going to burn.
Totally. I would agree. And I think also, Scott, there are links between animal fat and types of diabetes, because again, it kind of goes back to inflammation. That makes it very difficult for people to regulate the insulin in their blood. And I work with a guy at work. He was like borderline diabetic, and his doctor said, like, if you don't have a plant-based diet, if you don't start today, you're going to have diabetes tomorrow, basically. And so he's been eating plant-based for 5 months now or something. And this guy's overall health, like his whole attitude is different. He's become like a different person, and he was very much forced to do it. Like if he hadn't done it, he would have been in his health risk, and chronic illness would have been it would have been really bad for him, and it would have been bad for his family and all of that. And you know, every day, like, he comes to me and he's like, hey, this is what I found at the store. This is what I'm eating, you know? And at first he was eating a lot of really processed kind of like vegan foods, which is good and bad. So like you can totally do this transformation to a plant-based diet where you just substitute all of these foods that you love that have like a vegan alternative now that are really high in sodium, super processed, like very tasty, but not good for you. And you can eat a plant-based diet that way and have all of these things that are bad for you, and you're not going to be healthy. And then you can slowly, but you can utilize those things to help satiate you, to help you transition away from maybe wishing you were having like a burger every week, or some tofurkey like deli slices or whatever. And I think it's funny because sometimes I do eat those things, especially when I need extra calories. And I don't personally worry about having too much sodium, because if I'm training every day outside, especially for ultra running, I need the sodium anyways to retain water and stay hydrated. But there's always a balance. And I find it funny that they have these products now where you could basically you could totally fool somebody. You could show up at a barbecue with a vegan burger, throw it on the grill, and maybe nobody would know that wasn't real meat. And some people are very much like, some people think that that's total crap, because why would you make something that's like made from plants? Why would you make it taste like it's made from animal protein, that it's something that it's not? And I get that, but I think for a lot of people, it's very helpful in pushing them away from like their food addiction and bringing them towards a healthier diet. And I noticed with this guy, for example, in his like journey to becoming a much healthier, just overall person, and changing his lifestyle, not just his eating habit, but his lifestyle is changing as a result. He's able to exercise more, and his quality of life is better because of that. The endorphins that you get through exercise make you a happier person. And so if you're able to do those things, and if that's part of your transition, and now he doesn't eat any processed foods anymore. And I think it's the most inspirational and badass thing ever. It's just this guy that I work with, he's a server at the restaurant. He's is inspirational to me, where I think, this kind of thing it does help people. And it has been proven to help people with chronic illness because the foods are less inflammatory. Inflammation is the cause of a lot of disease. It really affects the way that our immune systems operate. And if you subscribe to this idea that our bodies are already perfect, and then we just corrupt them with putting bad stuff inside of us, that our system is meant to it's totally meant to go out throughout the day and be exposed to all these things that could be potentially harmful to us all the time, toxins everywhere. And yet we never really get sick. And I don't hesitate to say it anymore, but I've been eating this way for 3 years as plant-based, and I have not once had to go to a doctor to be sick. I have never had to use antibiotics. And I think that is, for me, that's huge, because it means my immune system is operating in the state that it's meant to operate.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's so amazing that your coworker, friend, it sucks that it takes things being put right in your face sometimes. Like for you had to be brought to your knees to make a change. And like for me, in other areas of my life, I've had to be, I got brought to my knees because sugar and alcohol were affecting my mentality, and they were affecting my gut, and they were affecting my emotions. And so, I got brought to my knees, and that created a massive change. And it's like, it's so hard because we all think about all these things, but not until it like actually comes down to it do we make those changes. But what it does is it helps us become more aware of our bodies and just the process, because like it's so easy to just discount, like we were talking about in the beginning. Like you get in these routines and everyone's like, everyone goes for après after skiing. So for me, it was like I had to figure out my different routines with what après meant for me, because I wasn't going to be drinking. So it was like, how do I be around that, and how do I establish these different routines? And I think, that same parallel can be drawn with the après for a big workout or a big push in the mountains, is like a beer and a burger, like a delicious meal. And it's like, when it kind of goes back to what we talked about in the first episode, when you're focused on longevity and when you're focused on the whole timeline and not just jumping from individual moment of satiation to individual moment of satiation, when you're like looking for, transcending that situation and having, like, you start to pay more attention to your body, you start to pay more attention to your diet and the way that it's feeling. And then all of a sudden you want to go work out more, and it just, you start to like, you're like, okay, well, let's go explore how I feel today. And, like, what did I eat yesterday? And then you just start paying attention to your process more. And I think it expands your perspective. You can hop behind your thought process more, like we talked about in the first episode,
Yeah, we could just jump right into I think what you're driving at, really, at least in the way that I can relate to that, is the whole thing is really a lifestyle change. And when I love the word satiation and like and when you mentioned transcending that, that's cool to me, because if you're just satiated in general, to use the word again, for me, I would understand that as just being very well balanced and not really wanting for too much, like not searching for some immediate gratification here or there. It's exactly what you said. It's this longevity. And I have noticed with other people who make these lifestyle changes that they eventually incorporate these other things that allow them to live their life more balanced. For me, we talked about it a little bit in the last episode. It was this idea that I could take active meditation and then make it really mindful meditation. And that had like a deep effect on my everyday life. And that kind of started before like the whole diet thing for me. But then it became like very much the two things were working together. And then having that, like you mentioned, the transcending, the satiation that transcends maybe just your food, whatever you're eating, plant-based, if you have a different diet that you subscribe to, but the satiation transcends. It becomes like your lifestyle is satiated. The way that you live every day is satiated if you live maybe more in this middle way, away from the highs and lows that come from being unbalanced. And for a lot of people, I believe that diet can absolutely help them find more balance. And that's why for many people, pushing towards like plant-based is a massive lifestyle change for people. And it ends up, it can be very difficult at first. It wasn't easy for me, as I mentioned before. I had days where I was totally cursing it, and I was ready to go and just eat the biggest hamburger I could find on the planet, and just didn't care about anything but that. But somehow willpower helped a lot to stay on course and not to digress too much, even if on occasion I do break my diet, because sometimes time and place for me, I really subscribe to this living in the moment mentality. And sometimes you're just going to be in a place in time and space where eating plant-based isn't an option. And I believe that the moment totally transcends whatever my personal diet is. And in some situations, I would much rather eat meat if I have to, in order to not detract from an incredible experience. And I think that in the end, if you have enough willpower, you can move from those moments right back into the way that you were. And it never changed whether you were plant-based or not, or vegan or not. It's just part of this overall different understanding about how to live. And I know for me, like, that came through working with mindfulness and meditation, but also through eating the diet. Because when you eat well, when you fuel your body with the best possible food sources, you have more clarity. You have less, your brain is less cloudy. And so you can think at a higher level.
Yeah, 100%. I love how it started out with like mindfulness and like the exploration of kind of, for me, it started out with the exploration of my body, and that turned into realizing this synergy between the diet and the body, and then also realizing the synergy between the diet, the body, and the mind. And then getting really, really, really curious about that, and constantly curious. And I love how, like, you don't need to, you're still comfortable calling yourself plant-based, even if you do, if the situation ends up that you eat meat for a moment, because it's not about defining yourself as, like, you don't need to have these rigid boxes because you're just okay with who you are and how you're living, because like when there's so often times that when we put a box on, like, this is exactly how I'm supposed to live, then the universe is like, well, what about this? It'll like try and break those. Whereas if you don't put any boxes on it, but you say, like, this is the direction that I'm pursuing, and I'm going to actively, like, whenever I can, this is going to be how I do it. But if I have to, I'm okay with, going outside my boundaries. I think that's, it's a really powerful mindset, because it allows for adaptation, but you know who you want to be and, how you want to execute your life. And it's a hard balance to find, I feel like.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, that goes back to having mindful practices in your life where you're able to kind of dive deep into who you are and what it is that you want to be as a human being, a member of this greater world, and what your impact is. And I think that for me, it's being able to express myself through the things that I love to do: skiing, running, talking to people about diet, those kind of things, like talking to people about meditation or mindful practice. Those are things that I enjoy to do. Those kind of express me at my core. It's having a self-awareness enough to understand that those are the things that I love to do. And then it's not only understanding that, but it's putting that understanding, whatever intention lies there, into actual action. Because if you just intend to do everything, but you never actually get anything done, you've not done anything at all. There's no action whatsoever. So for me, if I subscribe to this thing where I put it on my social channels, this live for the moment mentality. And basically what that means is that there's no moment more important than the one right now. It requires all your attention because that's the place and space that you're actually in. It has a lot to do with where you came from, because everything that you've decided to do has led you to that point. And that in itself is the perfect point to be in, because all your decisions put you right there. So a great example is when I traveled to Patagonia a year ago or so, my buddy who lives over in Bariloche took me to his grandmother's house for dinner one night. And she doesn't know me at all. Where I go in, hi, how you guys doing? Like, here's dinner. A crazy meat-based stew. And Inti knows that I'm vegan, but she has no clue that I eat that way. She's just met me once in her life. And Inti's like, I'm really sorry. Like, here's the deal. Like, this is what's for dinner. And I was like, don't even worry about it. Like, I feel incredibly honored and lucky to even be at your grandmother's house here in Patagonia for like a home cooked meal. I don't even care that there's meat in this, and I'm happy. I'm like, I'm going to eat it and enjoy it. And like, it's that time, a special time, and right there, there's no issue. There's no issue. There should never be issue. Whatever you label yourself, whoever you think you're, a vegan or you're the most carnivorous person on earth, like, it doesn't even matter. If you can't sit there and enjoy that, if you're if your like ideals are so strong that you can't be there and enjoy that, you've missed the entire point of even being there in the first place.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I wasn't always like that. Maybe I had a lot of strong feelings and like I had a lot of trying to find the word, expectation for myself to stick to a certain routine all the time and never diverge, and finding some flexibility there, I think, is important, because every moment is different. Every moment is an opportunity for you to take whatever you intend for your life to be, whatever that's. Every moment is an opportunity for you to express that in some way. And you can only do that if you're doing your best in that moment. And for me, if having a great time there and eating meat in that particular experience was the best I could possibly do to enjoy that, then I have no regret for it. Then I don't have a problem with diverging from my normal diet. And I'm probably not going to feel badly physically for eating that, because I'm not going to put some kind of energy or thought process into my subconscious that's going to tell me I'm going to get sick from eating this food, because I'm not used to it.
Yeah, totally. And it's amazing how much just being grateful for the food that's put in front of you, how much that actually like actively, scientifically preps your digestive system for being ready to eat and for like processing that food better. It's like there's these, there's, I think Hadley Hammer talked about it where, there's a study where someone with there are two separate groups. They were both given the same milkshake. One was told that it was like this awesome, healthy weight loss milkshake. The other one was like, it was like nasty, going to make you sit like fat and all this. Same milkshake, but their beliefs affected the outcome. And so it's like when you sit down and like you said, when you become present of the now and you appreciate that, then and you appreciate what's in front of you and you just become, mindful of the process, then I think your ability to move through it and dance with it is, tenfold, because you have the ability to actually be in appreciation for the moment and be free. When you put those boxes like that and life throws curveballs at you, you have no power in the situation because you have no ability to frame it in a way that gives you power over it. Versus when you're creative and when you are like, well, this is the situation that I'm presented and I'm just grateful that someone would give me a meal that would cook a meal for me, that I get to sit and have an asado with an amazing family and, in a beautiful foreign land. Other people could be like, well, this sucks. I'm going to have a stomach ache. All this stuff's going to happen. I might get sick for the next 3 days or whatever. And it's like, you control your own destiny with that one. So I love that you have this ability to determine your destiny just based off of the mindset that you bring to it. And I know that for me, there were times where like I was like, for a year, I'm not going to eat any processed sugar. And I did that. And then it's like, okay, I'll have some dark chocolate. Like that sounds good, Like we can play around with that, but it's good to have those boundaries and know like how convicted you can be towards something. But then it's also good to know that like you can have that conviction, concede a little bit, and then reinvigorate that conviction and then continue forward with your path,
Absolutely. I guess for myself, it's that there's that one higher thing for me, and that's the importance of the moment and how do I express myself. Like I said, how do I express myself in the best way possible right here and now? Because I don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now necessarily. I might have an idea of it, but there's no reason to be attached to that. There's also no reason to be attached to what's happened in my past necessarily, only to the point that I recognize that it's brought me to where I am right now. And if you live for the moment right here, it's that's how you live fully. At least that's going to be how I live fully. That's how I get the most out of this, whatever experience the human experience is for me.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that consciousness gives us this really cool ability to reflect back at the past and forward in the future. I just sent my book off to my editor and I have a whole section about the power of choice, the power of time, and the power of now. And it's like that whole 80-10-10 mentality. I think you can apply that to living in the now. So you should spend at least 80%, at the very least, 80% of your time living right now, right here, right now, presently. And then you should spend maybe 10% of your time reflecting on the past, reflecting on like the things that have happened in the past or your day or, like the events that have happened and processing those. And then maybe 10% of your time focused on the future. But that, because we have the ability to do that, and we have the ability to, like it's obviously, if you never set a goal to run an ultra, then you never run an ultra. So we have to have some preconceived notion of what we want the future to look like. But yeah, like being able to. So I think, yeah, it's cool that you mentioned the 80-10-10, because I've heard that in a different way before.
I'm going to steal that from you. I think that's really cool, actually.
Yeah, because I mean, like, our past is really powerful. There's a lot of power there, especially when you can see that, like, you have a story in your head about a past event that's happened. Like, so let's examine meat. If you were so averse to meat after the charcuterie experience that you told yourself this story in your head, no matter what happens when I eat meat, I'm going to get sick, then you'd never be able to break through and have that experience in Patagonia, to have that. Versus, and that's like a good time to spend time in the past to be like, well, actually, that's a false truth. Like, it happened once, but that doesn't mean that is the conditional situation. Like, meat equals being sick. So, like, spending a little bit of time in the past, untangle that story is probably good, but like spending a ton of time in the past being like, well, this one time I ate meat, I got sick. This other time I ate meat, I got sick. Like digging for stuff. That's when it's like, yeah, maybe not the highest best use of time, but yeah. How much longer do you have?
Well, whatever you'd like to do.
Cool. I'm probably pretty good. Maybe just like final words about diet. Like, you've already recommended that people go out and, eat at least one meal with lots of raw foods, but, like one final, words of advice for people who are going to go out and explore their diet and become mindful of what they're eating and that whole process. What would be your best advice for people to persevere? Because like you said, you can have those days where you are yelling and screaming and you're like, why did I ever even decide to do this? Like, all I want is, blank. And for me, sometimes it's been a beer. And what is the mindset? How do you have that conviction? And then how have you developed the mindset to be able to now consume some, but like totally be okay with it?
Well, I think for anything that you're going to make a big change in your life, whether it's diet, whether it's your routine, whether you have some goal, like you want to run a 50-mile race, you have to start to make adaptations to your daily life that are going to set you up for success, that are going to allow you to get to this like final point. For example, if your final goal is to become plant-based, you need to set up a process for yourself that's going to make that possible. The first thing I think is setting yourself up in your mind. It's really important because when you're dealing with food, like we mentioned before, there's a lot of very powerful addiction that goes on and associations that we form with food. For anybody, I would say be patient with yourself. These changes don't happen overnight. It's a process. It's, to go back to some things that we mentioned in the past episode, it's going to be making these small steps, one after another, that are eventually going to lead to the bigger thing being accomplished in the end. I mentioned with ski mountaineering to have an objective and then to put the puzzle pieces together along the way that end up building this larger objective in the end, it is a nice metaphor for the same thing that we're doing here with adapting to a plant-based diet. The first thing you might want to do is just eat one raw meal a day. Maybe that's all you can do. Because when you change to a vegan diet, if you go plant-based, when you're introducing way more fiber into your system, you're introducing way more raw foods, you need to be patient with yourself. It's going to take your digestive system, it's going to take your body time to adapt to those things. And that's okay. It's not something that you one day wake up and it's going to happen. So be patient, make small steps. If for you that's giving up red meat, and then eating a big salad instead, if it's maybe just giving up red meat, but you still want to eat chicken and fish and pork, or I like eggs and cheese, so I'm just going to, it's eliminating things slowly, not maybe if you're forced into a situation where it's very much a matter of developing a chronic illness or not, maybe you have there's a bit of an emergency that you need to make a drastic change right now. That's a different story. But if you're just looking for an overall lifestyle change, if you want to feel healthier, happier, you want to have clarity of mind, make the smaller steps. Put the pieces together that over, a few months and months and months, and eventually 6 months later or a year, it took me probably like 6 months to transition to plant-based. It didn't happen for me overnight. And so I think the most important thing people can think about when making any kind of change is having patience. Being patient with how your body's going to react. Being patient with how you're going to feel mentally some days when you're dealing with some of the addictions and associations, when you don't feel satiated by what you're eating, and try to develop an awareness for what you're eating and what foods make you feel most energetic, give you the most clarity. Those are the kind of things that are important. Those are the kind of things that if you think about while you're making your transition, they're going to allow you to go back to those things. You're going to go back to them time and time again. One thing for me that works really well when I'm feeling like a little calorie deficient, where it's like I have a big training week or whatever, and I need like more calories, it's like I'll start eating like a bunch of sweet potatoes. They really satiate me. Like they're pretty starchy, so they don't upset my stomach. They work really, really well for fueling like big days, long adventures, big trail running efforts. I always go back to that. That's something for me that works really, really well. I figured that out early on, and I recognized it, and I have that now. I have that as like a backup, if I'm like, man, I just went on this run and I felt like total crap. I wasn't drawing like from anything today. Where was that fire or whatever that I needed to get through the run? It's like, oh man, I'm probably a little more calorie deficient than I thought. Boom, baked sweet potatoes right into the oven. And I'll know like one of those or two with a big salad for me, like tons of spinach basically. And like the next day I feel so much better. Like I formed an association probably in my mind with a healthier food as opposed to like maybe going and eating a slice of pizza or something to fill my stomach. But I changed the association to something else, but I figured out along the way, it's a lot through trial and error. That's why you need to be back to the patience thing. You really need to be patient with yourself along your journey while you're making those changes, because eventually it's going to lead to something greater and better for you. But like nothing, you have to build a foundation and you have to put all the pieces together in order to get there in the end.
Yeah, definitely. I was talking to a guy the other day, and he was saying that, making these changes is like changing lanes on a snowy 2-lane road. If everyone's in the left-hand lane, then that's where kind of like that path of travel is going. but everyone wants to be in the right hand lane so that they're farther away from oncoming traffic because it's, there's less danger. But you're not just going to go from, 50 miles an hour in this lane that already has a path into this snowy lane on the right-hand side. You're going to slow down. You're going to have to start moving some of that snow and pushing through some of that resistance, move over into the other lane. And then what you're going to start to do is push for the cars behind you, push that snow out of the way. And then those cars behind you are you in the future. It's going to be easier for you to get over into the lane of I'm going to eat healthy because, when you're slowing down and making those changes and you give yourself that patience to change lanes and you actually, you slow down, you're not just like, because if you were to hop over to the other lane, you'd bounce all around, you'd probably swerve a little bit and you might crash. And that could be the same thing with, when you try to, it's like if you try to quit alcohol, just right away, like that's generally the way that you need to, but it makes for a bumpy ride, and same with anything. And it's like, if you like stretch a rubber band really quickly and then like just let go, it's just going to snap right back. But if you stretch it out slowly and, keep working it and working it and working it, eventually it'll just want to stay open.
And one more point, I guess, to go back to the resistance thing is when you're making a big lifestyle change, you're going to, like you mentioned, you're going to feel some resistance, especially from your body at first, not being used to eating certain foods, and you might feel physically down from not satiating yourself in those ways that you were before. But, stay positive, encourage yourself, and don't get down on yourself if you do fall off the wagon or whatever, if you end up just eating that piece of pizza or skipping a day where you didn't have a salad or whatever. Don't get down on yourself about that, because everybody's done that and it's just part of being human. It's about recognizing that you got off it for a moment and you can easily put yourself back on track. And it's kind of how you get back up from those situations that eventually is going to make you into the person that gets you to that end goal. It could be tough, but in the end it will be worth it. That's my biggest thing. I think that everybody can benefit from being plant-based. And even if your version of plant-based is having a burger once a week, well, if you're eating a bunch of raw food every day in between and you just need to have like that burger every week, that's fine. But you've done so much for yourself just to get you to that one point where you're eating well, like 60, 70% of the time. That's amazing. Like, you're amazing. Don't be overly hard on yourself at all, because in the end, like, you just encourage yourself and look for inspiration from other people. You'll notice that as you start to make the change, you'll all of a sudden meet and like have experiences with other people who are on the same path as you, or who have done what you've done, and you can gain it's exciting. You gain a lot of really great perspective from that, and that can help you along your journey.
Yeah, totally. There's so many people out there that have done it before, and like whether it's failed miserably and, gone bankrupt or, screwed up their diet or whatever it is. There's plenty of people who have gone out and done that before. And there's also plenty of people who have endured through the hardships before, and, knowing that other people have done it is such a powerful tool for your own consciousness, being like, well, if they can do it, I can do it, sort of thing, and being able to share your experiences and yeah, like just being able to, not compare yourself to others, fit into what you need to do, and, being able to yeah, like set realistic goals and accomplish them, I think is very important instead of, just trying to go straight out the gate. Like I'm going to go $0 to $1 million in a month.
Yeah, maybe you win the lottery, but
Yeah.
for most people, it does take a lot of perseverance, patience, resilience. It just takes tons of hard work to make any bit of change, or to get from one place to another. I remember when I ran my first 50-mile race, and there were so many ups and downs in that 8 hours, and you get to those trying experiences end up making you, they give you in the end a greater experience in which to draw from when you have the challenges along your way. So if any of this was easy at all, it probably wouldn't be even worth it. in the end, it's how we approach and deal with the things that are the toughest, whether it's getting ready for a race, whether it's what your ski objective or your job, your diet, lifestyle change, whatever that is. Usually when you're scared to make the change, that's the right change to make. And usually when it's hard, you're on the right path. In my experience, anyways, that is what is correct for me.
Yeah, definitely. Everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of your comfort zone. So go out and push it, right?
Totally.
Well, sweet. Thank you so much, TJ. You're awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure. Appreciate you having me on, Scott.
Of course.
Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of The Athletic Stance, a skier's perspective with Scott Chrisman. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you tuning in and listening. As always, I really appreciate you rating, reviewing, and subscribing. That always helps. And don't forget to check us out on social media, Instagram at The Athletic Stance, and Facebook, The Athletic Stance. It turns out I'm going to be having a live event in September teaching athletes how to become influencers and entrepreneurs. If you want to learn more about that, email Scott with 1T at theathleticstance.com. Thank you guys so much and have a great rest of your day.